Oh, you're talking where
Yeah.
that ones and islands on the
Yep.
bottom? Okay, good.
Yeah, so that is the 100 that's in line.
It was the happy couple. Yep.
We're not happy. And
Looking at
the patient's not being a couple.
I think that's the general thought.
Yeah, that's what everybody agrees. I don't think they agree, but they're just not doing anything about it. I haven't seen them.
I saw them today walking out of lunch.
Oh, you did?
I asked how's it going.
Yeah,
I got
I
this
definitely
morning.
will.
We're just trying to find more ways
Yeah,
to keep our classroom
we were at lunch and we looked up, we were like just getting ready to leave when we saw all of them on. We didn't really saw us, but we're like, okay,
Hey everybody, it is about that time. I've had a couple questions about your midterm exam / midterm paper, which on the schedule is due next week, because that's right before our midterm break. You know, I'm trying to be a little extra flexible this semester, so if you need like a couple extra days on either the midterm paper or the midterm exam, let me know. Like, we could probably work with that, probably figure that out. I know that it's kind of crunch time, and if you're taking lots of classes, all of your midterm papers and all of your final exams will be due around the same time, so that could be pretty stressful. Like I said, this semester, I'm trying to be flexible. You know, of course, at the end of the semester, there'll be final due date that won't be flexible. We'll need to just get it done because I got to turn grades into the dean. But like I said, midterm stuff, just let me know. I'd rather give you a couple extra days and have you do really well than have you not do it, you know? All right, any general questions on anything before I jump into covering South Asia some more? All right, well, South Asia, began talking about last time. Actually, I think I showed you some of these slides already. Showed you some videos looking at the region. Yeah, see if you'll notice, I changed the lights a bit today in here because I felt like a lot of these images were being washed out. It seems to be coming out a bit better now. As I mentioned before, the area that I went was around Delhi, New Delhi, that area, mostly because that's where the center of lots of the ancient empires were that I was particularly interested in checking out. So I didn't go to Mumbai or the places that you'll see in Bollywood movies. I didn't go to like shiny skyscraper type areas. It was a bit more in the lower income poverty areas. On this trip, I actually became a little fascinated with sanitation in lots of different areas of the world, because sanitation is something that we kind of might take for granted, but there are lots of areas of the world that don't have the infrastructure. Infrastructure costs money, right? And so large areas, not just India, which is these examples I'll show you, but like areas in the Philippines and lots of different places around the world, they don't have plumbing hooked up to their houses, right? And so they'll have to pump water from far away. And as far as getting rid of human and other waste from your place, well, often what you'll have is you'll have these kind of open trenches that if you get if you have a place that has plenty of water, right, things get flushed out. I would say very often in these areas, and they're, like I said, they're full of lots of waste of various kinds, but you'll see like pigs hanging out and eating what they can eat, that kind of a thing. And often these will go like in the front of a lot of businesses, and they'll put up little planks and things. So if you're ever visiting the area, just know what this is so you don't take a misstep and step into what is a bit like a latrine kind of a thing. I mentioned before that also there's, well, a lot of, it costs money to have garbage pickup, right? And there's actually been a big thing in India about trying to change the mindset as far as littering, because it just kind of has become a norm for people to litter. There's actually viral videos trying to get people psyched up into throwing garbage away and recycling, and with mixed success. I've actually seen other countries go through similar things Portugal and Spain used to have just kind of a lot of litter as a normal thing. Like I'd be hanging out and there'd be a garbage where you could put stuff, and people would just be throwing stuff like right by it. It's like, why not in the garbage? And it took a number of years and efforts to try to change the mindset. This is an example that was from the book when he looked at the caste structure and people who make, well, these kind of circular things out of manure. This is actually a very common source of fuel for warming, but also for cooking in lots of areas, especially areas of lower incomes, because it's very cheap. It's manure is plentiful. And you'll often see these just kind of out drying around. The area that I was, any kind of wood products were pretty expensive because there had been a lot of deforestation in the area, especially during colonialism. A lot of the wood was cut down for money and sent to Britain to make homes and structures. Wood is also kind of at a premium, especially in some of the areas that I went through, because for funeral fires, if you remember that part from the reading, it's very common to have a funeral fire traditionally with wood, but that's another reason why wood is scarce and very costly. A lot of traffic congestion, not dissimilar to what I talked about before, about a lot of places just don't have the infrastructure. Even the money that it would cost to expand these, it's actually very controversial in the US when they have expanded roads. And, you'll go to a place like Paris and they'll have these huge grand boulevards, right? Well, those huge grand boulevards, there used to be a lot of people who were living in those areas. They actually were usually poorer people, and they would just evict them, right? So all of a sudden you'd have a bunch of people who would be homeless because you would bulldoze that whole area. So it's a great big, not just the cost of infrastructure, but the political cost as far as displacing a bunch of people to make roads larger. As I was traveling, people would always want to kind of point out American restaurants. I don't know why. They thought maybe I'd want to go get some. But actually in India, my tour guide, I had a very unusual tour guide during most of the first part of my trip in India. He was of the high caste, the Brahmin caste, and he was very prejudiced. He would very openly talk about how other castes shouldn't be allowed to vote or have jobs and things, and it was a very weird thing to experience. But he had lots of these opinions, but he actually didn't know much about just kind of like anything, which is also weird for a tour guide, but that was just for a while, the tour. But he was very much like, hey, you guys have KFC back in the United States? And I was like, well, what do you think the K stands for? He's like, I know it doesn't stand for Minnesota. I was like, all right, you got me there. It does not stand for Minnesota. But we do have the
It's so tiny and cute.
What's that?
It's so tiny.
It is teeny tiny. I'm going to show you some pictures of the Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal is mentioned in the book, and there are some pictures. I actually think the pictures aren't very good, so I've included more, including all the things you can do at the Taj Mahal. A kind of confounding array of things. A coffee shop across. That's my tour guide that I was just maligning. So in the Taj Mahal, you have the great big structure that everyone has seen from the pictures on this side, and the other end is actually the structures has much more of the classic elements of a lot of Islamic architecture, especially historically. You have like this script design, right? You usually have mosaics of tiles that have repeating patterns. A lot of kind of complex mathematics in a lot of classic Islamic architecture, and that's related to the fact that, well, a lot of the lot of the first basically geometry and complex mathematics were in Islamic societies. That's why like algebra, things that start with an AL, you could often see that lineage. All right, going to the other end. You can't really tell from this photo, but interestingly, these structures, and again, this is another classic kind of Islamic architecture. Well, so I'm gonna have to clean the screen. I wonder if, I'm gonna call someone to clean the screen at some point. Well, as I was saying, these are actually built at a slight out angle. That was just in case there's any kind of earthquake or something and they would collapse. They wouldn't destroy the central structure. Islam in this area spread in many different ways. A lot of trade brought the kind of first people, and then later through different empires. We'll see this term a lot, the Mughal Empire, and people will in their mind often kind of connect that to the Mongol Empire, because they're just spelled slightly differently. But they're very different things, but that similarity in the terms is not coincidental.
Wasn't Akbar the one who tried to make like different religions into one? Akbar, wasn't he the one who tried to combine Islam, Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, and a bunch of different things?
There was some of that. There was some of that wanting to kind of unite these things. Yeah, it's interesting because actually he integrated different belief systems even into the architectural styles that he would put up in buildings and whatnot. But yeah, but let me backtrack real quick. Connected to the Mongolian Empire, the first people of the Mughal Empire were related to the original rulers of the Mongolian Empire, and this is through large amounts of time, but that's why the terms are kind of similar. Yeah, the reign of Akbar was considered one of the kind of more prosperous historically for India. Let's see. Before him, there had been a tax on Hindu, a tax, and so you'd have to pay money just to practice your religion. But he changed that up, and then when the British came in and basically took over, they took over in a number of different ways. They often try to kind of integrate the local Islamic leaders into their structure of ruling, where the different princely estates would pay the British and would offer up a number of resources within their area. This is one of the reasons why actually when India finally got independence, through time the local Indian population had fought for a lot of rights to work, rights to be part of the government. And so when the colonialism ended, a lot of countries when colonialism ended, the European powers just pulled out, and there's often kind of anarchy and civil wars and whatnot. But in India, like I said, the local Indians had taken up enough positions of power and positions knowing how the government worked and how things worked. Not to say that India's government is like perfectly functioning or anything. There's plenty of problems and corruption. So you can see this empire covered a large range of territory, all the way from what is currently Pakistan over to Bangladesh. Just a closer picture of Taj Mahal. Oh yeah, traffic. This is the dry season that I was there. In the dry season, I don't know if you've traveled to places that have distinct dry and rainy season. This is you can see the Taj Mahal in the background here, but the river that usually is full and flowing during the dry season goes down to just a bare trickle if you could picture if the Mississippi seasonally dried up, how kind of like different that would be, right? You'd have to do a lot of planning for water resources. There was a lot of, in India, a lot of people basically asking for money. There's this kind of law that if you travel, I just took a quick picture of this family who was asking for money. If that's something that kind of like is unusual for you, if you travel, there's places that you'll go and you'll see lots of that. At this point, I'm going over to Varanasi, and these are some pilgrims, a lot of pilgrimages going over there. Let's see, talked about caste and the caste system a bit last time, especially with the video. If I remember correctly, most people's opinions were that the caste system, did show an example of unequal exchange, right? Let's see, what else could I say about the caste system that hasn't already been said? It guides more than just the work that you do. It defines culturally lots of things, right? And although when Gandhi took power, he passed laws that made it so that it was illegal to discriminate against someone because of their caste. Similar to like everywhere else in the world, people will still discriminate, and they'll just kind of make up BS reasons about their discrimination or something, but they'll still very often not hire someone. And they'll be able to tell from language and how someone dresses what caste people are from. And so people who hire, well, if they're only going to hire people from certain castes, and you still have, people can't kind of pull themselves up, right? And these castes have all kinds of different layers and separations, and a lot of the castes, so for example, the merchant caste, which is kind of in the center here, through time, they've actually been able to be relatively prosperous, especially since, the rise of capitalism and merchants kind of around the world who do well, right, have kind of done better under that as a system. A lot of people who are farmers have not done as well, especially since, mechanization of farming has made it a lot more productive, right? And pesticides and herbicides and special varieties of seeds, but a lot of people just can't afford that. That's why this chapter talks about the Green Revolution. It's because there's just a lot of farmers in this region who, they collect their own seeds, and they have groups that they share seeds with rather than buying from large companies. But that also means when they're competing on the international market against farmers who have giant farms and have all the money for all the machinery and all the stuff, it pushes down how much, it's, on the one hand, it's good because that kind of thing pushes down how much food costs, and it increases how much food there is, but it makes it so that smaller farmers, it's similar to the case in the US, smaller farmers have been kind of slowly going out of business in the US for 150 years. Things have been more and more difficult for small farmers, right? Big farms are the ones that are often making all the money. I mentioned how there are laws against discrimination. There's also been an effort to try to have, if you've heard the term affirmative action, where you'll require a certain minimum percentage of different castes be allowed in universities or allowed in government jobs. In the United States, that was actually one of the first ways that, I believe it was Roosevelt and then Truman who, they were trying to put out laws against discrimination, but businesses were still discriminating, but there were places that they knew that they could change the laws and actually enforce it, which is in hiring in government positions, right? Similar thing happened in India where it's if we can control, for the government ourselves, we can control the percentages of different castes that are given jobs and positions.
Professor?
Yeah.
So is this a system based on every country on Earth? Or with regards to, so for example, India has the caste system, America has racism, Britain has class system, certain places in the world have tribalism. So would you say there's something effectively, like, not effectively wrong, but would you say there's something that effectively, there's a systems that are effective that need to be changed within every country on earth at this point?
Every country on earth, I would say every country seems to have some amount of discrimination, you know? It's interesting you should ask because actually the caste system specifically used to be in lots of other countries. Like China actually had a caste system. It was not as complex. The reason it's covered in the chapter in India is because it's still so predominant and it's so complex. China, when they had their big revolution, there was a huge push to basically, China wanted to see itself as modernizing, and so a lot of older traditions, the government just kind of labeled as feudalism and in the past, and that they're moving away from that. Things including gender discrimination, and they made a lot of efforts to kind of like stop that stuff. And a lot of it did, like the caste system as it was in China does not really exist anymore, so they did actually get rid of it. But similar structures happen in lots of different places. It's a tough question to answer, but I would say there's more and less discrimination in different places, it seems, right? It really depends on the places and what's going on. When we get to the chapters about Southeast Asia and Pacific Islanders and stuff like that, we'll see governments that make much more effort to try to have more equality among the populations, but plenty of places that don't. So it's might be an incomplete answer, but that's the best one I got. Like I said, I became a bit obsessed with their plumbing and lots of stray dogs. India's the only country that I never saw a lot of cats. I asked one of my guides why, and he said that they're considered bad luck. But I think probably some people have cats, but I never saw any. Most other countries in the world I've gone to. A lot of little temples all over here and there. You can see a lot of flowers here. This is a little bit of a fertility temple. I had to look this one up to see what exactly it signified, but this structure signifies woman, this structure signifies the man. If you go here and do some prayers, the hope is that you'll be able to have kids. This is a bit blurry. Well, the reason I took this blurry picture, sometimes you're somewhere and you just gotta take a picture and see how it turns out. But this was one of the many areas that had been suffered a lot of soil degradation. You know, places that have a monsoon or that have large amounts of rain, very easy to have the soils degrade, especially since there was a great deal of deforestation in the area. Deforestation was causing a lot of farming problems. These signs basically say don't cut down these trees. What happened, people have heard the term tree hugger, right? You ever heard the term tree hugger?
Yeah.
Yeah? What's a tree hugger?
A hippie.
A hippie. Sure. Well, the term actually originates in India. What had happened was there's a lot of deforestation, and there are places that get a lot of rain. The trees and the roots are what are holding the landscapes together. So if you have deforestation and the roots rot, you could have huge landslides, or just if the fertile layer of the soil is washed away, that'll make it so you can't farm. Well, in India, what had happened is this was happening increasingly, and I got other pictures of. This is an area that my guide had said there had been actual soil here years ago, but it had been washed away through time, and they have lots of signs up saying to not cut down what few trees remain in lots of these different areas. Well, anyway, as I was saying, there was a lot of farming areas were in crisis, and so when the people would come to cut down the trees, the few that were left, people would literally wrap their bodies around the trees because it was the only way, and that wouldn't always stop them from cutting down the trees. But that's where the tree hugger term actually came from. It was a bunch of activists who wanted to save the soil, save the trees, because otherwise if you're a farmer and you have this area of land that you could farm and the whole topsoil gets washed away and it's just rocks underneath, then you're just completely out of a job, right? I wish I can remember the specific term, but that type of activism has a lot of its origins in India. This chapter talks about microcredit and microfinance. Does anyone remember what that is? Microcredit, microfinance? Yeah. In a nutshell, let's say that you finish college and you want to start up a business, right? Maybe some of you will do that. Well, it takes money, right? You want to start up a business, it takes money. Depends on what kind of business you want to start up. And, what do you do to get money? Some of you maybe would reach out to relatives. Maybe you would go to a bank, right, and try to get a loan, a small business loan to get you going. Maybe $10,000 would be a relatively small loan to start up a business. Many, would get $100,000 or $1 million to start up a relatively moderate-sized business even. You might need $1 million of startup money. Many areas of the world, people don't have access to credit. They don't have access to $1 million. They don't have access to $100,000. They don't have access to $1,000, right? Microcredit was an effort to try to increase the availability of credit. So, for example, farmers who are going out of business because of the soil degradation, right? Well, can they go into some different type of business? Well, microloans could be, $50, $100. And often it would be a number of people who would pool their money together. Well, this where I'm here is a factory that is an example of this. This was a community of, this was all women who would pool together a number of different small microcredit loans to start up their own business. And it's a paper making business. And part of how they get they make their paper out of old t-shirts. If you remember in the previous chapter about how much clothing that is donated in places like the US or in Europe, donated clothing goes out there right into the world. But there's, often it will hurt local clothes making companies, right? Well, in India, a lot of the clothes, by the time it got there, a lot of people didn't want it, right? It's wasn't even worth having for free. And so a lot of it was getting thrown away. Well, these women got together and they decided that they would just try to get as much of these t-shirts as possible, because if they're mostly made out of cotton, you could then break them down and make them into paper products. So that's why this all looks like a whole bunch of ripped up shirts and stuff. Because that's basically what it is. This is their storage area. And what they do is they process these, they shred them, they rip them apart, they put them in here, and they run them through this machine. This is a group of them. After they've kind of been pressed out, they take them and they lay them in these big piles, right? I know it doesn't look a lot like paper at this juncture. And this isn't exactly high tech, right? This is still, although this is, it's industrial technology. This is for, as you could kind of imagine, this squishing out the paper, sometimes adding some color. You can see a bunch of them that are squished out back here. But again, this was a group of 30 or 40 women who each got a micro loan of $20, $30, $40 and they put all their money together. All this is just showing you the workplace and kind of images they have about. I think our book does say how many gods there are in Hinduism. I remember the ballpark. Does anyone want to make a guess at how many gods there is in Hinduism?
Like 300.
That's a fair guess, but that is on the low. I think that you probably saw the number. It's the number of gods in Hinduism has been counted as over. Yes.
6,666.
Oh, that's a better guess. Over 300 million gods in Hinduism, which is a lot to track, right? And it's not that everyone follows each one and whatnot, but these are just a couple things that were in the workplace there. So these are some of the paper products that are made at the end. These are for things like wrapping presents and all kinds of different things. And one of the interesting things was I actually have seen some of this on sale when I was holiday shopping. I think it was at Patina. People know that little store. But they were selling this exact stuff, and I looked on the label, and I was like, it's from India. It's like, could be, how relatively successful was this company? If you remember from the reading on this chapter, the vast majority of these microloans, it was considered very risky at the time. And a lot of people predicted that they would all lose all their money and not get paid back. But it's something like over 99% pay back these microloans, like they make money on it. And usually it's just to get a couple things. Like you could have a number of people who want to, make clothes. Well, they pull their money together, just buy a sewing machine so that they could take turns using it, make money, right? So when it comes to development, microcredit seems to be one of the more successful things. I'm going to an area now that is a bit of a middle income area. Good example of middle income in India. These are all self-built housing, and these are all recently put up, so they're all a little bit still in the construction process. But you could kind of see when this chapter talks about culturally, you have a strict difference between kind of public and private space, right? And so your little area is very, very fenced off and walled off. I actually went for some cooking lessons, and so they had set up a little tiny shop here at their front door. There was a little temple inside. Like I said, it was self-built, so concrete. And I asked the people, I said, well, can I take photos to show to my classes? And they said, well, sure, go ahead. So just like normal kids' room stuff, they're putting in their own electricity. You may know people who also put together their own house and put together their own electricity, very similar kind of thing. Like I said, it was a cooking class. You often see, if you've been in the US and maybe you'll see someone will put like a horseshoe over a door frame for luck. You'll often see Ganesha there. This was the kitchen, and again, this was a place that was a bit like a middle class home, right? So like relatively prosperous compared to a lot of the population within India. They cook with gas. I think I mentioned before that actually a very large percentage of the population cook with those manure round things. Oh, that is just me with, I had a headache during the tour, and my guide, he said that the marking on his head was a number of different like herbs that are for different specific effects, and he had some that he said were for headaches. And I think it's, it's like, if you buy that stuff, it's like the head-on headache stuff. I think it was kind of like that, like it did actually take care of my headache. Again, this is out in rural areas, kind of lower income. Usually every block or two you'll see a hand pump for water, and that is kind of like a newer thing. Historically, people would have had to walk large distances to get water, miles, and you can imagine how much that would change up your day-to-day behaviors and how much work you'd have to do just for washing, right, and preparing food if you had to go and grab it all and haul it all back. I visited one place that still had all the wiring and stuff from the British colonial times, and it was still functional. Well, this is a good example of what I was just talking about, right? This family comes out to a well, and they have to fill up all the water needs that they will need for at least a day, if not a couple days, right? And so it's a kind of a major operation to go get the water and to haul it back. Let's see, I think before I get into the next topic, I think that I'm gonna split you up into groups for some questions. And normally I finish a chapter up on Monday, but this week I'll just finish this chapter on Wednesday, because there's not gonna be quite enough time. Trying to look at which questions I was gonna have you guys work on here. I may come out and do the card thing. I thought I'd put these together in one. Does it not save my changes? Alright, hold on a sec. This opened up. There it is. Alright. Alright, well, I'm going to come out and do these cards, and then I'll have you answer a couple questions. Yeah, these are the ones. Alright. Here's a card. Allowed enough time to actually get through it. Alright, did I miss anybody? Middle section of this? I didn't. Miss anybody else? Alright, let's see what the. Oh, I didn't give you one? Okay, who has green? Who has green? I would say back corner there's a bit of a green grouping. What about pink? Who has pink? Pink is just really spread out. How about over here-ish for pink? Did I do green already? I did green? All right. Purple. I would say there's a purple cluster here-ish. What color did I not do? Blue. Who has blue? Blue. How about blue meet here-ish? Let's see, any other color I didn't do?
Red.
Oh, the red. Who has the red? How about red come up here? Looks like there's a little bit of a grouping. All right, assemble. I'll come and get your cards in a sec. These questions are in the book if you need to look at a different version of them.